Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of questions. One, how do you feel about the fair tax?
I co-sponsored it.
Okay.
I also co-sponsored the flat tax. The fair tax I co-sponsored. I co-sponsored the flat tax. I prefer the fair tax, but it's a little more complex to describe to people, and Mark Schauer and others will and have, the last election and will again this election, try to portray me as wanting to put a 23% sales tax on top of everything else that you pay already.
Fair tax.
Well, I explained it as just briefly as possible. It won't be a complete, you need to get Neil Bortz's book on the fair tax, and you will really understand it. I think you'll be enthused with it. But the fair tax just simply says we do away with all federal taxes. All federal taxes, including FICA. Mark Schauer and others hate that thought because that takes away that slush fund access. You do away with that and you replace it with an across the board, no exemptions, 23%. It ends up being, in most cases, 19% because of the spread. But let's say 23% consumption tax on everything. First purchase. And then replaces the dollars. But remember, now when you do that, the drug pusher who goes to buy his new Lexus is going to pay the tax for the first time. That covers what he isn't paying now. I mean, it's remarkably simple and fair tax, though there's no such thing as a totally fair tax. But it takes the hands of government out of it. It mandates that people pass this. It's to take constitutional amendment to do away with the 16th Amendment, which is the federal income tax. So when Mark Schauer and others say, Walberg wants to put this tax on you, wait a second, the American public will have to vote it in. We put it on the ballot for them, and then they vote it in. It says to you, when you buy a new home, you'll pay the tax. But the producer of that home, the contractor, who goes out and buys the studs and buys the sheetrock, they won't pay the tax on those goods and products that they use to build a house. So it reduces their cost in building the house, which reduces the cost ultimately to sell it to you, if capitalism and free enterprise works with competition. If you buy an old house, like I live in an 1837 vintage farmhouse, and you buy that from me, you're not going to pay that tax. It's been paid once. You don't pay it again. If you buy the brand new car, you'll pay it. But the lug nuts, the brake components, clutch components, will not be taxed in the original production. So the cost of the production of the car is less. So anyway, that's the basic guts of the fair tax, and there's also a component in to make sure that it's not regressive, that there's a prebate simply sent out with what's left of the IRS, because again, you don't have the income tax anymore. You'll just have an accounting agency that sends these checks out on the basis of the poverty level, so that the basic goods, housing, shelter, food, clothing is covered. Anything on top of that, the tax dollars are there.
Well, if they don't pass the fair tax, how are they planning to put the money back into Social Security that they stole?
Well, we were required to fund that program. And we either fund it by deficit spending or we fund it with actual cash. And that's why Mark Schauer can stand up and say, hey, you've never missed a check, have you? Well, that's true, because we are required to send those checks out. But now, every time we send a check out to the Social Security system, including my 95-year-old mother, we're deficit spending. We printed the money. We borrowed the money. That's what we're doing. The slush fund has IOUs in it. We would not be in deficit if that weren't the case. So we'll keep doing it that way. But could we do it better? We sure could. And the more we can hamstring politicians from having funds that they can spend, the better off we are. The more we can limit the federal government in its size, scope, and responsibility, the more power we give back to the states, which really ought to be the most powerful entities in the nation. The individual states, the sovereign states, not the federal government. The federal government should be very limited in what we do. We should spend a little time in Washington as opposed to what we are doing. We should have far less control and responsibility. And these are things that'll help change it. But the people have to push it.